because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
Today, in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
The courtroom was electric, a tense and simmering atmosphere that seemed to mirror the gravity of the accusations against Sean Diddy Combs. Cassie Ventura, once a glamorous figure who graced red carpets with an effortless allure, now stood as the prosecution's most vital witness. Her testimony was a jarring departure from the polished, high-profile image the world once associated with her. And it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Every word, every pause, every restrained tear seemed to reveal a truth so raw, so unsettling, that even seasoned trial watchers couldn't help but lean in.
Two women who said that they had been abused, saying it happened decades ago, and they thought that they could look at the evidence in this case, which is about assault, and view it fair and unbiased based on what comes into the courtroom. And one woman who is proceeding said she was arrested when she was 16 for shoplifting at Harry Potter's World at Universal Studios. The judge asked her what she stole. She said
it was as if the courtroom had become a portal into a dark and hidden underworld, one that stood in stark contrast to the glitz and glam of Combs' public life. For years, he had been the untouchable mogul, the self-made king of an empire that transcended music, fashion, and pop culture. But now, that empire felt like a facade, one meticulously built to shield the horrors Cassie described. She spoke of manipulation, control, and a lifestyle that blurred the lines between indulgence and exploitation. Her words painted a picture of a man who wielded power not just over his career, but over the lives of those around him, bending them to his will. The details were chilling. Cassie described orchestrated gatherings in luxury hotel suites where the boundaries of consent and control allegedly dissolved into nothing. She spoke of her emotional and physical exhaustion, of feeling trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. The prosecution wasted no time in framing these events as calculated acts designed to assert dominance, acts that went far beyond the realm of personal relationships and into something far more sinister. Prosecutor Emily Johnson's voice was steady, deliberate, as she laid out the allegations, a pattern of coercion, threats, and systematic misuse of influence. It was a narrative designed to grip the jury and hold them captive, and it was working.
Centerpiece of a lot of what happened during direct testimony were freak-offs. And what the prosecution tried to show was that he forced and/or coerced her into doing these freak-offs. And we've talked about this earlier this week, that at least my opinion is that in a lot of these, the prosecution just didn't close the loop. It was something she felt.
But if the prosecution's strategy was to unmask Combs, the defense had its own plan, to dismantle Cassie's credibility piece by piece. Enter Ana Estevao, the sharp, unrelenting defense attorney who approached Cassie like a lion circling its prey. Estevao's cross-examination was brutal, probing every inconsistency, every perceived exaggeration in Cassie's testimony. She brought out text messages, emails, and even recordings, each one aimed at painting a different picture, one of a willing participant in a toxic but mutual relationship. Estevao's tone was calculated, never outright dismissive, but always tinged with skepticism. It was clear she wanted the jury to see Cassie not as a victim, but as someone complicit in the chaos. This strategy wasn't without its risks. By acknowledging the tumultuous nature of Combs and Cassie's relationship, the defense opened the door to some damaging admissions. They didn't deny that Combs had moments of aggression. Instead, they tried to reframe those moments as isolated incidents, unconnected to the larger narrative of coercion. And while Estevao's line of questioning was methodical, it occasionally veered into territory that felt almost invasive. At one point, she asked Cassie about messages that seemed flirtatious, even affectionate, exchanged during the same period she claimed to have been living in fear. Do these messages sound like someone who feels trapped? Estevao asked, pausing long enough for the jury to glance at the screen displaying Cassie's words. The implication was clear. If Cassie could express love, could she also be exaggerating her claims?
So Diddy, after the Cassie lawsuit, gets hit with a bunch of lawsuits, and then ultimately the raids, and then this criminal case.
Cassie's response was measured but emotional. She explained that her outward behavior was often a survival mechanism, a way to navigate a volatile situation without triggering further harm. Her voice cracked as she described the mental toll of pretending everything was fine. "You do what you have to do to get through the day," she said, her eyes fixed on the jury. It was a moment that seemed to resonate, if only for the vulnerability it revealed. Then came the video. Grainy footage from a hotel hallway in 2016 showing a figure identified as Combs dragging Cassie by the arm while she appeared to resist. It was the kind of evidence that doesn't need words. The room fell silent as the video played, the tension palpable. The defense tried to downplay it, suggesting it was an isolated incident and emphasizing that the context surrounding the footage was unclear. But the prosecution pounced, using the video as a visceral reminder of the power dynamics Cassie had described.
Listen to everybody, but you believe all proof.
Believe the facts.
This video is proof.
Hands down proof.
You know?
As the trial unfolded, rumors began to circulate about a potential plea deal. Observers speculated that Combs' legal team was feeling the heat, that the weight of the evidence, combined with the emotional impact of Cassie's testimony, might be too much to overcome. Whispers of behind-the-scenes negotiations swirled through the media, adding another layer of intrigue to an already sensational case. If Combs were to accept a deal, what would it mean? Would it be an admission of guilt, or simply a strategic move to avoid a harsher sentence? And what would it mean for Cassie, who had put everything on the line to tell her story? The public, too, was divided. Social media lit up with debates, some condemning Combs as a predator while others accused Cassie of exaggerating for attention or financial gain. It was a reflection of a broader cultural divide, one that often pits survivors' voices against skepticism rooted in celebrity worship. For every tweet supporting Cassie, there was another questioning her motives, fueled by the defense's portrayal of her as a woman scorned.
Let's talk about the filth that's starting to come out in the early days of the Diddy trial. This, of course, is P. Diddy. Surprise, surprise, he's a creep. Surprise, surprise, he's done horrible things.
But beneath the headlines and the hashtags lay a deeper question. What happens when the truth is too messy for easy answers? The trial wasn't just about Combs and Cassie. It was about power, control, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. It was about an industry that has long blurred the lines between glamour and exploitation, and a culture that often looks the other way until it's too late. As the week drew to a close, the prosecution hinted at more revelations to come. They had only begun to scratch the surface, they promised, and the jury should prepare for a deeper dive into Combs' world. Every day seemed to bring new twists, new layers to a story that was already almost too much to process. And while the courtroom battles raged on, the world outside watched, waiting for the next bombshell to drop.
Jurors heard testimony from a key prosecution witness in Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial in New York City Tuesday. His ex-girlfriend and singer Cassie Ventura spoke about her 10-year relationship with Combs and the psychological, physical, and abuse she says she endured. Ventura first leveled accusations against Combs in a 2023 lawsuit, which was settled a day later. Dozens of men and women have filed suits against him since 2020.
And just when you thought the courtroom drama couldn't get any more explosive, the offstage panic began to seep into the spotlight. While the prosecution meticulously lined up its evidence and witnesses, a darker undercurrent was brewing, one that wasn't confined to the four walls of the courthouse. The whispers of fear, betrayal, and desperation among Sean Diddy Combs' inner circle started to ripple outward, threatening to pull others into the storm. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Diddy and Cassie anymore. This was about who else might go down with him. Behind the scenes, the air was thick with paranoia. Those once close to Combs, trusted confidants, collaborators, even old flames, were reportedly scrambling to distance themselves from the fallout. The trial had opened a Pandora's box of allegations, and the terrifying possibility of Combs flipping to cut a deal with the prosecutors loomed large. If he were to start naming names, who else would be implicated in this widening web of deceit and control? The thought alone was enough to send shockwaves through the industry.
As you all know, I made a request today for what we were calling a gag order, and I'm not going to walk out of court and do anything other than...
Some of the anxiety stemmed from the way Combs' influence had allegedly woven itself into every corner of his empire. For years, insiders whispered about the loyal network of associates who worked quietly and sometimes not so quietly to keep his private escapades out of the public eye. From assistants to security personnel, from business partners to high-profile collaborators, these were individuals who had seen too much, heard too much, and likely done too much to keep the machine running smoothly. And now, with the prosecution's case building momentum, those same people were reportedly terrified they might be dragged into the courtroom next, not as witnesses, but as co-conspirators. The allegations were damning enough on their own. But what made them even more dangerous was the sheer volume of evidence the prosecution had begun to hint at. Rumors swirled about emails, phone records, and financial transactions that could potentially connect the dots between Combs and a network of enablers. These weren't just accusations of bad behavior, they were accusations of systemic complicity, the kind of thing that could take down not just individuals, but entire careers and reputations. And for some, the fear wasn't just about legal consequences, it was about public exposure. What happens when the curtain gets pulled back on a world that thrives on secrecy and image?
Responsibility.
Well, you
got
to do your due diligence, and his team should have did the due diligence. And a lot of times, people do slip through the cracks. There's things that you don't see and don't find out until later on. But I mean, when people are making claims like the way people are making claims, you have to do your due diligence to make sure that if you're having that person on your platform, which is a huge platform, that you're putting out the proper and correct news.
The tension wasn't confined to industry insiders either. Even celebrities who had once publicly aligned themselves with Combs were feeling the heat. Suddenly, the glamorous parties, the lavish gifts, and the high-profile collaborations didn't look so innocent. Were they just innocent bystanders? Or had some of them been closer to the inner workings of his empire than they were willing to admit? The media was already digging, and the public was quick to jump to conclusions. In a world where guilt by association can destroy a career overnight, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Take, for instance, the cryptic social media posts that began popping up from some of Combs' former collaborators. Vague statements about new beginnings and leaving the past behind hinted at a frantic attempt to rewrite the narrative before anyone else could. But the timing couldn't have been more suspicious. Were these genuine bids for redemption, or were they calculated moves to get ahead of whatever bombshells might drop next? Either way, it was clear that the walls were closing in and everyone was looking for a way out.
Those situations lend to maybe some issues with tampering. And I do feel like there are victims who are scared to come forward, including my client. She was very nervous about if he was going to get bail this week. And once I told her, and then come after people, including her and some of the other individuals. And she was very relieved when he did not receive bail.
But the posts weren't the only signs of cracks forming. Quietly, behind closed doors, a handful of former associates were allegedly reaching out to the prosecution, gauging the possibility of cooperation agreements. The whispers of these behind-the-scenes negotiations were enough to send shockwaves through the entertainment world. If even one person from Combs' inner circle decided to talk, the repercussions could be catastrophic, not just for him, but for the entire ecosystem that had supported his rise. And make no mistake, deals like these don't come cheap. Anyone willing to flip would likely have to offer devastating evidence, the kind that could unravel not only Combs' defense, but potentially implicate others in his orbit. The uncertainty was palpable, and it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. Adding fuel to the fire, several high-profile names who had long been associated with Combs were suddenly finding themselves under scrutiny. Tabloid headlines began speculating about who might have attended those infamous gatherings, who might have known more than they let on, and who might have been complicit in keeping those secrets buried. Some of these figures, once vocal supporters of Combs, had gone conspicuously silent. Others were issuing carefully worded statements that seemed designed to say a lot without actually saying anything. The media was relentless, digging into old photos, social connections, and past collaborations in an effort to piece together the larger puzzle. And for those who had built their careers on carefully curated public images, the threat of exposure was nothing short of a nightmare.
You know, when you're in a kind of industry like rap, hip hop, music industry in general, the secrets around, working for a label.
Even more chilling were the financial implications. Investigators were reportedly combing through years of business transactions, looking for anything that might connect Combs' empire to the allegations at hand. From large, unexplained payouts to suspiciously timed wire transfers, every detail was being scrutinized. For years, Combs had been celebrated as a brilliant businessman, a mogul who knew how to make money move. But now, those same financial dealings were being cast in a far darker light. Was it all just smoke and mirrors? A web of transactions designed to obscure the truth? And if so, how many people had helped him keep it that way? The deeper investigators dug, the more it seemed like this trial wasn't just about one man, it was about dismantling an entire system. And then there were the whispers about potential retaliation. Within Combs' inner circle, loyalty had always been a cornerstone. But loyalty, as it turns out, is a double-edged sword. Those who had once stood by him now faced an impossible choice: remain silent and risk being implicated, or speak out and face the wrath of a man who, even from a courtroom, still seemed to hold considerable power. For years, it had been an unspoken rule: what happens in the circle stays in the circle. But now, with the threat of prosecution hanging over their heads, that rule was beginning to crack. Allegiances were shifting. and the fear of betrayal was palpable.
It's pretty interesting because I think, we have seen many photos, videos of Sean Combs, aka Diddy, through the Associated Press, through Instagram. And so to see him kind of in person after being in jail for 3 weeks now was pretty interesting, to say the least. And I say that by being that you would expect him to feel a little defeated, a little gaunt, anything like that. But it wasn't that case. He appeared confident.
One former associate, speaking anonymously to the press, described the atmosphere as pure chaos. They claimed that certain individuals were already lawyering up, preparing for the possibility that their names might appear in the next round of headlines. Others, they said, were in denial, convinced that their proximity to Combs wouldn't be enough to land them in trouble. But as the trial continued to peel back layer after layer of Combs' alleged misconduct, it was becoming increasingly clear that no one was truly safe. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this fallout was the way it seemed to ripple outward, touching people and institutions that had, until now, seemed untouchable. From record labels to fashion houses, from private security firms to public relations agencies, the trial was revealing just how deeply embedded Combs' influence had been. And with every new revelation, the question grew louder. How far does this really go? Was this a case of one man's downfall, or was it the tip of a much larger iceberg?
The question is he a criminal? Is he basically akin to a mob boss running several criminal enterprises? And while it's very clear to me he is a depraved, disgusting person, we have to prove that he violated the law.
The entertainment industry, long criticized for its culture of silence, now found itself under an uncomfortable spotlight. For years, insiders had turned a blind eye to bad behavior, excusing it as the cost of doing business in an industry fueled by fame and excess. But with the details of Combs' trial now public, that excuse was starting to wear thin. If even half of the allegations were true, it raised uncomfortable questions about who knew what and why they stayed silent. As the trial progressed, the tension outside the courtroom only grew. Would someone from Combs' inner circle break ranks and testify against him? Would the prosecution uncover a paper trail that implicated others in his alleged crimes? And perhaps most chillingly, would Combs himself decide to cooperate with prosecutors, trading his silence for a lighter sentence? The possibilities were endless, and none of them boded well for those who had once been part of his world.
Talking about her experience in that video, how she had a big movie premiere that was coming up, and what had happened was they were engaged in a freak-off that she didn't really want to be a part of, and Combs had punched her. She knew she had a black eye. She felt she had to get out of there, so she waited for a moment when he was occupied. She said he may have been on the phone, in the shower.
By the time the week ended, it was clear that the trial was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning to scratch the surface of a story that had been years in the making. As the public watched with bated breath, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't just about Sean Diddy Combs. This was about an entire system of power, privilege, and complicity, and the people who had built their lives around it. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Diddy's empire, or will his inner circle close ranks to protect themselves? And how many more names are we going to hear before this trial is over? Let us know your thoughts down below, and as always, stay tuned, because something tells us we're only just getting started.